welcome to Kick-Ass Switch, putting the K in magic. I'm Joanna DeVoe, and you are watching a live stream thing, Google Hangouts, I don't even know what I'm using right now, about spiritual abuse and the sneaky ways that it can set us up for problems later on in life, leading us into perhaps like a narcissistic abuse situation with the boss or a lover or a family member or even a friend, a political organization, or a cult, or just a sense of low self-esteem. It can create depression. Yes, I'm recording. Okay, I hope this is recording. And you know what I didn't do? Which I've done some events in the past. Let me see what happens. Chat. Can you chat with me? Do you see this? I guess the more important question is, can I see you? Because I know from former chats that I've done, people are chatting away and I have no idea that they're there. So I'm not able to answer their questions, but my hope today was to be able to answer your questions. Well, first let's just define spiritual abuse. Let's just start right there. I think that there are very obvious things that come to mind in terms of like maybe like a church abusing its members sexually or physically, like using their spiritual authority to abuse people, to abuse children, let's say, in a sexual way. And I'm not talking about that today. I think that that's a little bit different than what I'm talking about, although it's all intertwined for sure. But what I'm thinking about is the kind of spiritual abuse that it separates you from your own personal experience of source. How did I answer? Somebody asked me this because I have a history of not being good with the chat section. I posted on Facebook yesterday that I was going to do this, and does anybody have any questions? And somebody wrote, it depends on how you define spiritual abuse. So the way I defined it to her was, I personally think of it as anything that bullies you out of your sense of freedom and personal experience of source. So that's kind of where I'm coming from today, although that's not the whole picture. That's just what I personally have in mind. And I think it's interesting to me, the reason I'm thinking about how if you experience this when you're young, if you've grown up in a church, let's say, where there's some spiritual abuse going on, how it can form your experiences in other ways. Like you may leave the church, you may, say, I'm done with religion altogether. And then you'll find yourself in kind of like a cult of personality politically, or getting involved in a really cult-like way of eating. I see this on the internet. And these little cults, I think the internet, this is a really important thing to talk about right now, because I think the internet is so amazing, but it can, all things are good and bad, both. There's the light and the dark. And one of the things that live in the shadows of the internet is it has created an amazing platform for cultish behavior. And I have seen this happen a number of times. And when you start looking up like warning signs of a cult, and then you start applying it to like certain self-help groups of people that all believe the same thing, or certain people that are really into like a specific diet and very judgmental of anybody who's not, or somebody who's like ride or die for their political opponent and or their political whoever they want to vote for in the political system, and then demonizing anybody who doesn't agree with them. You start to see like this cultish behavior appear in other ways. And it happened to me too. I got very much involved in this is not a statement about vegans or the raw food vegan movement, but I got very involved in the raw food vegan movement, and I started noticing like messaging that felt very cult-like to me and unhealthy, not with everybody, just with like a certain hardcore little group within that bigger group. And it felt very much like the messaging I received in Christianity. There was like a real, and also not saying anything bad about Christians. That's my background. That's what I come from. So I'm just speaking from my personal experience here. And I am not a Christian. If you found this video and you're a Christian, this whole conversation will probably be triggering for you. So this is probably not the video for you, although I have Christian friends, I have Christian family, and I welcome them. But I started noticing things in this particular cult-like group within the raw food movement that they reminded me of some of the messages of Christianity. It became very much about awakening and enlightenment and cleansing, constantly cleansing, which reminded me a lot of sin. Like we need to constantly be forgiven for our sin, and we're sinful by nature, so we must cleanse and cleanse and cleanse. I have something pulled up here. Let me make sure I got 1 foot in Google, or 1 foot in Chrome and 1 foot in Firefox. So I hope this is working. I see nobody chatting with me. So if you're watching this and you want to chat, maybe you're trying to get my attention. I can't see you, just to let you know I'm not ignoring you. But yes, we're still rolling. I'll get better at this over time. I've decided that I want to do more like this because it saves room on my computer, and it saves me having to edit videos, and really just a lot of time, which is exciting. But there are some warning signs of what makes up a cult. And it's interesting that a lot of these warning signs, they have a lot in common with the warning signs of being in a really controlling codependent relationship, or being in a narcissistically abusive relationship. And it extends beyond spiritual abuse. So let's see, what are some of the warning signs? Absolute authoritarianism without meaningful accountability, excuse me. The absolute authoritarianism really resonates with what I grew up in. When you look up warning signs of a cult, or you look up spiritual abuse, what's fascinating to me is like 75%, I'm just making that number up off the top of my head. It could be more, it could be less, but much of what comes up when you Google that is created by Christians. And the definition of you're a Christian of a cult is basically anything that is not in alignment with your doctrine, your belief system. That's not really the definition of a cult as I understand it. And the way some of the things about the Christianity I grew up in, it seems like the world's largest cult. Religion to me seems very cult-like sometimes. I know for some people it is their source of strength. It can be both. I know some very religious people that their faith really sustains them in hard times, but then they have this like dark shadow that leads to a lot of judgment and just some icky stuff. But warning signs that you're involved with a cult or somebody you love is this absolute authoritarianism, is we are the one truth. And anybody that disagrees with us is not only wrong, but they're probably going to hell, or they're dangerous, and you need to watch out for that. With one exception that I can think of growing up, all my friends were Christian, and that was a question that was asked of me, are they a Christian? My best friend for like 8 years was a Catholic, and I was quickly schooled that Catholics are not Christian. And I've actually had this argument with my mom recently that like, Catholics are Christian, Mom. She's like, no, they're not. They worship Mary. I went over to Europe and I saw all the Mary statues. And they have missions going down to help people build homes in Mexico. And the hope is that in helping them, they will lead them to the true Christianity, because I guess Catholics are going to hell. So if you're a Catholic, I'm sorry, that's a bad piece of news for you. You're going to hell. So it's very much based in like, what is scarier than you're going to burn in hell forever? And when you're raised in that, I mean, it's like the truth. You don't question it when your grandparents and your mother and your father and all the people that come into your home. Like when I grew up, if we had a party, everybody was a Christian. Everybody in our family was a Christian. All of our family friends were Christians. All of the events that we did were Christians. If we went to a holiday party, it was at the church most likely. And we spent a lot of time at the church. So we were very much isolated in this Christian bubble. So no tolerance for questions or critical inquiry is another sign of being in a cult that I experienced. I had a lot of questions when I was a kid, especially as I started getting up in like, I don't know, I want to say like 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 6th, like those later years of elementary school where you start really kind of individuating from your family because you're at school most of the day and not everybody at school is a Christian. So you start having questions. And I would ask questions. One line of questioning that I think annoyed my mother was, you know, what if someone's never heard of Jesus? Like, do they go to hell? And, you know, my mom's answer was like, well, that's why we go out into the world and we tell everybody about Jesus. You know, everybody has the opportunity to learn about Jesus. Christians are all over the world. And then I'd be like, well, what about if there's like one person that grew up in a forest alone and never had any interaction with other people and just lived in the forest or the jungle? Like, would they go to hell? And my questions would get very like specific and complicated like that. And to her credit, she always had an answer, and she'd be like, well, I think they would just know. So I guess just isolated in the jungle, like, I don't know, they would just know the message of Jesus naturally or something. I don't know. I would ask if a little baby dies, does a baby go to hell? And questions like that. Let's see, then there's a lot of different signs of being in a cult. This is not about being in a cult. I just think it's interesting to look at the different warning signs. If you Google spiritual abuse and then you Google warning signs of a cult, and then you Google narcissistic abuse and you look at them, they all have a lot in common. And I guess what I'm saying here today is that spiritual abuse, especially spiritual abuse that you grow up in, can pave the way for these other experiences, and you can find yourself gravitating toward them because that's what you're comfortable with. That's what you know. That's how you've been programmed to think and behave. So an unreasonable fear about the outside world is one. And we definitely had that. The fear of persecution. I was taught so much about how Christians are persecuted. That was a big message that I received growing up over and over and over again. And then as you get older, you start seeing like, and Christians are persecuting other people. Persecution it's not a Christian specialty, but Christians certainly participate in it. It's a human thing. I think all of these are based on the human desire to control other people. And it's a focus on power over versus power within. I see this, I'm going to bop all over the place just to let you know, because I'm just chatting with you today. This is not like a proper bullet pointed presentation, but I see this a lot in the New Age community. You'll see like a lot of these like really beautiful, charismatic, like spiritual gurus that are in their 20s that have no children and not a lot of life experience, presenting themselves as gurus, spiritual gurus on the internet. and then getting like hundreds of thousands of followers or more, and really presenting themselves as enlightened masters or being awakened. And then if anybody like starts to question them, the people in their comment section, which I would consider their cult, they like attack them and jump on them and claim that they're not evolved enough or they're not enlightened enough. And there's like a subtle shaming that goes on, you know, like if you're not eating this specific diet, no judgment, you're just not there yet. You're just not as evolved as me. You're not as awakened. You're not woke. Woke. I love that. Like, when did that pop up? The last couple years, it's like, it's funny politically, like people on the far right claiming to be woke and people on the far left claiming to be woke. And it's like, who's really woke? Are any of us? I don't know. And then you see a really genuine person that is filled with spirit, filled with power within is a great way to put it. And they're not putting that on you. They're not using shaming language, and they're not elevating themselves above you. Even Jesus, according to the Bible, was very much about like, whatever I can do, you can do. What's possible for me is possible for you. God is in me just as God is in you. It's other people that elevated Jesus up into the status that he is now held with this whole set of like new rules, new rules to control. And they're all fear-based, when Jesus was a very groovy, peaceful dude. But I think of someone, I can never pronounce his name. Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm going to say his name wrong. The Tibetan monk, he's so filled with joy. He's so peaceful. He's so loving. And that just comes out of him naturally. And it's easy to gravitate toward a person like that, but then also maintain your sense of spiritual autonomy, your own connection to God. He's not saying, these are the rules, or follow me, and I'll tell you about God. I'll tell you the rules of God, and I'll tell you the rules of heaven. It's very much leading from example from this very peaceful place. I think of someone like Louise Hay as being very much like that. Just a very simple, easy, non-judgmental messaging, and a lovely, relaxed, open-hearted person. Wayne Dyer was very much like that. And I feel like I can spot the difference, but maybe I'm delusional. Maybe we all are, but that's how I see it. Something I hear a lot too that's really interesting to mention in this context before I go off on that tangent. And there's nobody talking to me. And if you're talking to me again, I apologize. I can't see you. Sorry about that, guys. I'll try to answer any questions in the comment section down below if you ask them, but I do sometimes on Patreon, on Facebook, on Twitter, my email inbox, I get a little overwhelmed sometimes with comments. So if it takes me a second to get back to you, that's why. Something that you hear a lot in the New Age community is that God is love. And that feels true to me sometimes. But I sometimes think, and I don't know how this ties into spiritual abuse, but I think I used to write, there was a time like in the front of my Bible where I flipped that around, because we were taught that too, where I started writing love is God. And the way I think about love is God now is that not God as in the mysterious creative force, the source that flows through all things, but more like love is the path to heaven. I believe we create our own heaven and hell, and that the messages of the Bible that are not tied up in the political rules of the day. I think there's a lot of propaganda in the Bible, a lot of controlling, fear-based language in the Bible, a lot of politics in the Bible that is like getting mixed up with metaphors and symbolism. and allegories, parables, and spiritual lessons. And then it all gets like jumbled up together. I believe that we create our own heaven or hell here on earth. So if love is God, the way I've personally experienced this is that if, there's fear and there's love, and there are these two poles, like let's say you have a stick and fear is on one end and love is on the other. Anytime you're moving toward fear, you're moving towards your own personal hell, and you're probably creating hell for the people around you too. Anytime you're moving toward love, you're moving toward heaven. You're moving toward a sense of peace, a sense of joy, a sense of love. And one feels good and one does not. But getting back around to this idea of spiritual abuse, the messaging in the New Age community is that you have to constantly ascend and you have to constantly rise above. And anytime you have any negative feeling, you are not evolved, you are not awakened. It's some kind of sin. It's not called sin in the New Age community, but I believe that the spiritual abuse many of us experienced as kids, being taught that we were born into sin, that we were innately sinful from the moment we took our first breath, and in need of forgiveness and need of atonement. I think that comes through with like some of the new agey diets that are like cleanse and cleanse and cleanse and ascend, the messaging to ascend and ascend. And then you get a case of spiritual bypass going on, and it creates a great big shadow that of all this unrecognized pain and shame that pops out at the most inconvenient, weird times. So what I find very interesting, the kind of, what do you even call these, modalities, tools, systems that I really gravitate toward are things like tarot, astrology, Jungian psychology, paganism. In all of these things, what is taught is that we have both the light and the dark within us. And when you're able to acknowledge that and live in the balance of that, the dark does not control you. So you're not evil. I don't know if I believe in evil. I won't even say that because that brings up so much pushback in the comment section. I think there is a connection to love and a disconnection from love. Let's just put it that way. when I said evil, I was thinking about the disconnection of love. Where am I going with this? I'm thinking about the shaming of those darker aspects of yourself. They create depression. They create anxiety, they create low self-esteem, and they create the inclination to get involved in an abusive relationship. The way that an abusive relationship often begins, interestingly, is the way that many cults begin. And that is by someone coming in at your lowest point when you really need help and becoming an instant friend and lifting you up and making you feel great. And then soon enough, the relationship flips to where you feel like you're nothing without that person, or you're nothing without that group, or that, like you need them to survive in a way, to get to heaven or to survive in the world, depending on if it's a personal relationship or a cult-like situation. And that's how these things start to really, really intertwine. Let me look at another question too, because my son's going to be coming home. I thought we'd be having a live chat here, but I'm not able to chat with you guys because I don't see you. Let me flip back over. Yeah, no, I don't see anybody. So Nicole asked, I would be interested in hearing how you would deal with peer pressure in the spiritual community. I think that definition that I gave earlier about spiritual abuse is anything that bullies you out of your sense of freedom or your personal connection to source, God, the force, goddess, whatever you want to call it, that's a form of spiritual abuse. I think that peer pressure can be a very subtle form of spiritual abuse, or very aggressive if it's a whole group of peers. And Nicole, I know that you're a vegan, so I'm going to use this one little section of the raw vegan community again to make my point, but that's only because that's an experience that I had, and I'm not saying veganism is bad or a cult in any way, nor am I saying that about raw vegans. There are some amazing, beautiful raw vegans. Look up Dara Duvernay if you don't know her. She's awesome. I love her. But what I noticed in that group is if somebody, they were really applying themselves, they went 100% raw vegan, they'd been doing it, they'd been really a part of that community, maybe for years. And they were experiencing symptoms like they were losing teeth, or they were losing their hair, or they went to the doctor and they came up with some really sketchy blood work that showed they had some deficiencies. They would be shamed by the community in like a kind of mass peer pressure that they were experiencing a healing crisis, or they were being accused of not doing the diet right, or they must be eating too many nuts, or they must be eating too much coconut oil, they're eating too much fat, or they must be sneaking cooked food, because cooked food is Satan in that particular community. And so they either need to push through it because these are healing symptoms, or they're just a bad person. If you're not with us, you suck, you're out, you're going to hell. And a lot of times there'd be like a piling on of that person. I have to say, if you're losing your hair, or you're losing your teeth, or you go to the doctor and you have some major vitamin deficiencies, that is a message from your body that you should pay attention to. Do not listen to strangers on the internet that's telling you it's a healing crisis, it's a natural process, it's a detox flu. No, it's not. I'm not saying detox flu or healing crises don't exist, but listen to your body, pay attention to what's going on, work with your doctor. And I'm not trying to get into that whole conversation either, but in addition to that, there would be people that would leave that group and take a whole other different approach and say, whoa, that's not the ideal, perfect spiritual diet. And then people would create whole websites about that former member, attacking them, debunking them, talking shit about them. And it became like their full-time job to attack this person for daring to think for themselves. And that is something that you see in spiritual abuse. When somebody leaves the church, Satan has got a hold of them. They've fallen from grace. Satan has a hold of them. You can't argue with someone either when you're like, I'm not a Christian anymore because of this, and they think that you have somehow been mind controlled by Satan. And I mean, you're just going to get stuck in a whole loop because you are not allowed to have your own personal experience of God. You need a middleman, you need a book, you need someone to tell you how it's going to be. And then just, I think peer pressure, I don't know. I think I gave a very melodramatic idea about how that can present itself, but obviously there are more subtle ways that shows up. Yeah, I'm not going to touch that any further because there's an even weirder, crazier subject to approach. So Lisa asks, law of attraction versus mental illness. That was her question. And instead of a question mark, it was a whole bunch of exclamation marks. And I don't even know how to approach that because it's such a sensitive subject for people. But I will say, I'll bring it back around to narcissism. Genuine, like toxic, narcissistic personality disorder is a mental health issue. People like that don't even know that they have mental health issues. We throw the word narcissism around a lot now, like whoever broke our heart is a narcissist. Someone we don't like is a narcissist. Like it's just become this weird catchphrase, and it's really taken the power out of it. But I think it's important to educate yourself about what, you know, Google, again, I keep recommending Google, but do some Googling on narcissistic personality disorder and educate yourself about the difference, because somebody that has that, they can be very, very, very powerful bullshit. And I can think, I'm not going to name names here. Honestly, I'm not going to name names here because I don't want people to come after me. And that's the truth. That's the truth. There are certain names you can mention on the internet and people will freak out on you because there is a cult of personality going on. And there is a lot of this going on in the New Age community. So I think when you say, let's see, what is it? Law of attraction versus mental illness. I think there are a handful of people in the New Age community that present themselves as experts on the law of attraction, among other things. And they seem to have, I can't diagnose them, some real narcissistic personality disorder going on, to where they believe their own bullshit. They have an incredible amount of charisma, because what is more attractive than absolute, complete confidence in what you're saying? There's something very, very attractive, and people that gravitate towards someone like that, I won't say they have mental illness going on, but they have some sort of trauma, perhaps spiritual trauma in their past, some sort of spiritual abuse that has set programming up in their mind that they need to be saved. They need a savior. They need someone to tell them their truth. And they get their sights on someone like that, a very charismatic leader type person, someone who presents themselves as a guru, and it's like moths to a flame. And then it creates a snowball effect, because the more people that come, the more people that come. And when you have masses of people who believe the same thing, who are following the same leader and holding up the whatever doctrine of that particular leader, even if it's a law of attraction thing, once you get a lot of people believing and preaching that, they start to self-regulate. They start to get rid of the dissenters and attack them. Like I said, they'll just set up a whole website and spend their time trashing that person on the internet and ruining their reputation for daring to think for themselves. And so I really think that the solution to spiritual freedom, to spiritual abuse is, I want to say, to go in search of, but you need no look any further than within, is to find your own direct connection to source. This is my own personal dogma, take it or leave it, but I believe that God is in all things and all things are in God. And when I say God, I mean source, that mysterious creative energy that flows through all things, which means you have a direct line to that. It's in you anytime you want, and you can access it through your body. You can access it through your intuition. And the best thing you can do is get in touch with that, so that when you get a gut feeling about someone, or when you start to have doubts about something, like niggling doubts, you know that you can trust yourself, because God is for everybody. Nobody has a monopoly on the truth. Nobody. And that is my message for today. Is there anything else? I have little Post-it notes everywhere. Maybe I'll do a redo on this if there are too many questions following it. But in talking about God this month, I really wanted to talk about spiritual abuse. I will say this subject came up on Patreon when somebody there talked about leaving the Christian church, because her Christian church, I don't want to say the Christian church, because there are some lovely Christians out there, but her particular church, I believe what happened is she got pregnant and then was like cast out of her church for getting pregnant and not being married or whatever. That is spiritual abuse. That's deeply, deeply traumatic. Oh my God. And this is reminding me of a really big point I want to make. So yay, I'm glad I brought this up. And we continue. I lied about ending this because this is very, very important. So she had that experience, and that's kind of what launched me into this whole line of thinking, because I had recently seen a series of videos by Dr. Cat Woman. Her name is Dr. Cat Man, N-N-M-A-N-N, but because she's a feminist and she teaches people about goddess things and all things feminism, she actually calls herself Dr. Cat Woman, not Catwoman, like Batwoman or Supergirl, but like Cat is her name, and then Woman is her last name. And she's amazing. And she did this series of lectures that I had just seen right when this patron of mine on Patreon asked this question, and it just ignited something in my mind where I've really been thinking about it. And that's largely why I wanted to talk about God in the month of March. But she was talking about oppression and the assault of mind, body, and spirit that is applied to oppress whole cultures of people. You can do this to oppress one person, which might happen in like a narcissistic abuse relationship on a one-on-one level, but I think it's really fascinating to think about it on the macro level. So assault number one, level one of oppression, is an assault on the mind. Level two of oppression is assault, or maybe I'm getting it mixed up. I think number one is assault of the body, number two is assault of the mind, and then this is the one that just fascinated me and really rang true. Number three is assault on the spirit. So you have, I don't know why this is true of our history, but you have like these white Christian cultures going into these brown cultures. And although I think we did it to ourselves before we got there. So like the Druids were white, I believe, and you had like Christians going in there and doing this stuff too. So it's not about white or brown, but what comes to mind as an American is what white people did to brown people. I mean, brown Native Americans and slaves. We went there and we took away their God. And what happens when you take away their God, when you take away their goddess, when you take away their gods that they worship, their mythology that goes back throughout their ancestry. When you take that away, you break their spirit. And once you break their spirit, I wish I had said this at the beginning. This is not my thought. This is Dr. Cat Woman's thought. When you break their spirit, you're able to control them. And what's fascinating to me is we went to Africa, we broke these people's spirits, we took their God away, we brought them over here, we beat them, we raped them, we abused them relentlessly. And what happened? They adopted our truth. They became Christians, to where now you have many generations of slaves who are Christians that sometimes like beat their children in the name of the Lord because of the programming. This programming is so deep and painful and traumatic, and it gets passed down from generation to generation to generation. And I really, really am enjoying being alive right now. One of the beautiful things about the internet is watching people come together to bring these traditions back, which is why I think we have neo-paganism. Not because of the internet. I know that was happening before the internet, but because of the internet, I'm able to experience it. And experiencing, like, I see a lot of Black people in America going back to their African roots and falling in love with these African goddesses, you know? And to me, that's like a reclamation of your experience of God, your own spirit. It's taking back your spirit. And because when someone attacks you at the root, they attack who you are. It's foundational. It goes even deeper than I think, mental or physical abuse. It really goes straight to the root of who you are. And when you start to reclaim your own spirituality like that, you start to empower yourself, and it starts to become a power from within. And that's a really healthy place for power to come from. And it switches the focus from power over to power within. So it's a beautiful way to raise your children, because you're not training your children with these spiritual abuse practices. You're teaching your children how to tap into their power within. You're modeling that for the rest of the community. And I think the more people that embrace that idea of power within and a real connection to their own spirituality, the more healing it is for all of us. That's my take on it. So let me check back in to see if there are any comments. There's not. I'm so sorry if you're commenting and I can't see you, but I'm going to end this thing now and send you off, as I always do, with much love. Peace. Stop broadcast.